Alrighty. Well, it's coming up to 9 o'clock. So tonight, um, thank you everyone for joining. Tonight we will discuss, continue with our discussion regarding regarding the halachas of Pesach. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about matzah, and also a little bit about different kalim or dishes, um, and how you would kosher different stuff in your kitchen. This is not going to be this is not the full discussion, as the halachos can be a little bit complicated, and very specific to whatever type of dishes you have in your kitchen. But we'll get at least a general view of how things work. And obviously, when you have questions that come up for your situation, for your dishes, for your kitchen, um, you should you should make sure to ask a rabbi who's able to help you out and help you answer the question so that you can kosher a kitchen in a halachically appropriate way. Um, but we'll speak first about matzah. That in regards to matzah, that there's a special idea that it's appropriate and it's a person really should, if they can, bake their own matzahs, which is why for many years in the shul we made our own matzahs, which is a really amazing thing, that we had the ability to do that. Um, that it's a person should make their own matzah if they can. They bring from different rishonim even who would make sure to tend to the matzahs and make sure and to really get involved in this process, even though they could have had someone else just make the matzah for them, but they wanted to be involved and make the matzahs themselves. And the Rizal, um, he says that there's a great, when the person schwitzes, they spend a lot of their effort working over a matzah. It's good for your neshama. There's a tikkun that happens. There's like a correction of your soul. It's very good to spend a lot of time schwitzing over making the matzah. Um, so that's in regard to making the matzah ourselves. So if you're able to do it, that's great. But not everyone is able to do it. But in regards to matzah, so matzah's there's there's the matzah that we eat throughout Pesach, and then there's special idea that we're supposed to fulfill our obligation on the Seder night of eating matzah. And that matzah, um, there's 7 or maybe 8 specific things that that matzah needs to have. I mean, we're going to go over that. But most of our matzah is the same anyways, that we eat throughout Pesach. Um, but it's called the mitzvah's matzah, the matzah that fulfills that higher level, higher obligation, and that is necessary for fulfilling the actual mitzvah of matzah on Seder night. So these are the 7 conditions. Number 1, that the matzah has to be made from the five grains. So one can only fulfill their obligation of matzah with flour that has the ability to rise and turn into chametz. So that's wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. Those are the 5 grains. We typically make matzah using wheat because that's considered the best um, the best flour, and that makes the mitzvah more beautiful if you use the best. If you can't get wheat, then you should get the next best option. Um, if there are times that people can't get wheat or they can't eat wheat for whatever reason, then they should get what they consider the next best option for making that flour. That's number 1. Number 2 is that the matzah needs to have the status of, it's a little confusing, the status of lechem. Lechem, we don't mean, we like sort of like it's not bread because it doesn't rise, but the status of lechem. So that means that it has to be made out of, it can't be made out of the bran, and it has to be, sometimes they can make like dough that's a little bit rough, that you wouldn't really feed to human beings. You might only feed to pets, so that would be no good. It needs to be entirely baked. It can't be half baked. And if it's just little crumbs, that's not going to be sufficient. It has to have the status of lechem. Additionally, the matzah needs to be kneaded only with water. That's because the third condition needs to be lechem oni, which means bread of poverty. So if the flour is kneaded with fruit juices instead of instead of water, that's called matzah ashira. Instead of lechem oni, that's called matzah ashira, like wealthy matzah. You need lechem oni, which is like poor bread, which means flour and water only. That's the third condition. Number 4 is the matzah needs to be lachem. That means not lechem, this is lachem, which means to you. That's what the word lachem means in Hebrew, and that's learned from we compare it to different psukim in the Torah. But the point is that the matzah needs to belong to you. So you would not be able to fulfill your obligation if you had matzah that belonged to your friend, or if someone stole matzah, you wouldn't be able to take that matzah and fulfill your obligation with it on Seder night. It needs to belong to you. Number 5, the 5th condition, is that the matzah needs to have a higher level of watching. It needs to have a shmira. That's what we said. That matzah needs to be guarded more carefully, and that's based on the pasuk. It says ushmartem et hamatzos, meaning you should guard the matzahs. So we'll explain why that's relevant. But the point is, it's not sufficient to just see that there's no chametz. It needs to have a higher level of being watched. So on a basic level, that means if you look at the matzah from the time that you start kneading the dough until the matzah is baked, then on the basic level, you have fulfilled this obligation of shmira, of watching the matzah and guarding the matzah. But the Rishonim, they add a little bit to that obligation, and they say that you need to have this shmira, this watching of the matzah, from actually an earlier time, not just from the time it was kneaded, but from the time you even grinded the wheat. Since when you grind the wheat, sometimes that might be close to the water, so you need to already guard it from there. And others extend this to not only from the time of grinding, but even from the time of harvesting the wheat. That as soon as you're actually harvesting the wheat, you need to have this shmira, this guarding of the matzah. And that's where this idea of shmura matzah, that you hear shmura matzah, that's where it comes from. That means shmura matzah means that this is matzah which has been watched, has been guarded since the time of harvesting, which is to ensure that nothing has occurred at that point, which might cause this harvested wheat to become chametz. So in America or outside of Israel, where it rains more, even when the wheat has not even been harvested yet, but when the wheat completely dries out and doesn't really need the ground anymore. So if water were to fall on that wheat, that would be an issue for this higher level, this shmira, meaning shmira matzah. So they're careful to cut the wheat even when it's still moist. But in Israel, apparently it doesn't rain as much, so they only start harvesting when it's dry. I don't really know exactly how this works. But that's apparently what goes on. But that's when you hear about shmira matzah. That's that idea. And then the 6th condition is that matzah needs to be made lishma. That lishma means for the mitzvah of matzah. It needs to have, you need to have had in mind the purpose when you're making the matzah and doing these actions should be for the mitzvah of matzah. So my father says the Hasidim go to Arizona to harvest wheat because they want to get the dry wheat, so that they don't have to use the moist wheat. They go to Arizona to get the dry wheat. That's all for this idea of the shmur matzah. But anyways, so the shma, this idea of having in mind for the mitzvah matzah, that's also based on the same pasuk, ushmartem es hamatzos, that you need to guard the matzah. but the guarding should be, you read the pasuk to say the guarding should be done for the mitzvah of matzah, that you're doing it all for the purpose of making matzah. So when do you need to start having in mind? So really, it needs to be done from the kneading to when the baking gets finished, and that becomes relevant because that means matzah should not be made by someone who is not going to have in mind the mitzvah of matzah. So that means it really should not be made by a non-Jew. They're not going to have it in mind. And sometimes there are questions that come up about a child because there's the child is making the matzah. Does the child really have the ability to know that they're making it for matzah? They just think, maybe they might just think that they're rolling dough. So that's a little bit of a discussion. There's a little bit about a machlokes about this, but some say perhaps it's enough if the adults are with them and everyone's saying the Shem Matzah's mitzvah, and everyone's reminding the child. But that is a discussion. But of course, if you make, let's say you just happen to make, you wanted to make these crackers, right? You want to make crackers in under 18 minutes, and you stuck it into your oven, and there was no issue for chametz. And then you said, "Oh my gosh, this looks just like my matzah. In fact, this is kosher matzah." But you would not be able to fulfill your obligation of uh, of matzah on the Seder night with that because it wasn't made for the purpose of matzah. And this is why when we would bake the matzah in shul, right, we would all try to say out together the Shem Matzah's mitzvah. We're doing this for the purpose of baking the matzah, all to fulfill this aspect of matzah on Seder night that needs to be made lishma for the purpose of matzah. Where this gets tricky is the question of machine matzah. That a machine, some say, how can a machine make matzah lishma for the purpose of matzah? A machine doesn't know that it's a l'shem matzah's mitzvah. I'm doing it for the purposes of matzah. I was thinking nowadays with AI, soon the machines will for sure know that they're making it for the purposes of matzah. They'll know way better than we are. But until then, for now, the machines you say don't have the ability to think that they're making it l'shem matzah, l'shem mitzvah matzah. So some say machine matzah. You shouldn't use that to fulfill your obligation, especially for sure on the Seder night. Others argue that as long as the Jew is operating the machine, it's not the machine that's really making the matzah. It's we're making the matzah and we're pushing the button to help us make the matzah. So as long as the Jew there who knows he's making it for the purposes of matzah, that is called lishma. So that's the machlokes there. Ask the Rosh Yeshiva what he thinks. If you have questions about that. So then there's also some say that when does this idea of watching and the Shema, no, here, sorry, that even though we say that Shmira, the watching, needs to take place from harvesting, right? That's the idea of Shmura Matzah. But that is only regard to the watching, but the fact that it needs to be made for the purpose of Matzah, the Lishma aspect, that does not need to take place from the harvesting, and that only needs to take place from the kneading, which becomes relevant because then you can have a non-Jew do some of the harvesting process for you. Others disagree with that, but that is the most prominent opinion. As one is making the matzah, to say again that if you're making a matzah, you say the Shem Matzah's mitzvah. You really don't need to say it all the time, and it's sufficient to just say it once at the beginning and say everything I'm doing for the rest of the day, for the rest of this baking process of the Shem Matzah's mitzvah. But we typically say it again and again and again to remind ourselves. Also, it's very fun. Also, I think we even have a song that we made a little bit of a remix. And then finally, really only this matzah shal mitzvah, meaning the matzah on the Seder night, needs to have a watching. It needs to be done the Shema, but we like to be more stringent about this, and we have we try to make sure that it's always the Shema, even for all our matzahs, at least from the kneading time. And then finally, the last condition of matzah is that it needs to have the taste of matzah, that one can't fulfill their obligation with matzah that has been boiled or cooked because that causes the matzah to lose its taste. If you stick the matzah in water, besides the effect that it brooks, some people are very careful about the brooks, most people are not, but some people are. And you boil it there, then the matzah is going to lose its taste. So you wouldn't be able to do that and then have your matzah take the night, so your obligation. However, if someone's very sick or they're old and they're not able to eat matzah, it is permitted. Practice was also to draw new water for this matzah. So that's another maybe condition. But those are the conditions for the matzah on Seder night. I'll just review them. That it needs to be from the 5 grains. It needs to have status of bread. It needs to be just water, just flour and water. It's called lachamoni. It needs to be lachem. It needs to belong to you. It needs to have this extra shmira, which is where shmur matzah comes from. It needs to be lishma for the purposes of making the matzah. It needs to have the taste of matzah as well. The last point on matzah before we go into different dishes is that some people, when we used to do this, have the minhag to bake matzahs for Pesach on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. This is based on the fact that the Korban Pesach was brought after Chatzos on Erev Pesach, after midday on Erev Pesach, afternoon. And since matzah is related to the Korban Pesach, so some people say that you should bake your matzah that you're going to use after Chatzos, afternoon on Erev Pesach. So many people are not careful about this because they say that really the connection between matzah and the Korban Pesach is just that the matzah needs to be eaten before Chatzos at night. On the Seder night, it needs to be eaten before midnight. And it doesn't really have to do with when you bake the matzah. Also, people are worried about baking matzah on Erev Pesach because you might be producing chametz and you might not be able to get rid of it. But some people do like to do this and are careful to bake matzahs on Erev Pesach, which I remember doing. It's a little bit stressful, but it's very, very fun. It was very fun to bake matzahs Erev Pesach. So the yeshiva ever does that, definitely would recommend it. Oh, okay. So now in regard to dishes, we have 13 minutes to discuss dishes, and there's a lot to discuss. So we'll do the basics, and when you have questions about your specific kitchen, you should make sure to ask these questions. So they're in the Torah and Bamidbar, the Torah describes that a purification process for metal utensils taken as spoils of war. So the Torah describes it as follows: that basically when Bnei Israel, they got a bunch of different stuff from Midian, the Torah said you need to purify those vessels that you got, the dishes that you got. And the Torah says anything that comes in contact with fire must be passed through fire. Anything that did not contact fire must pass through hot water. So Chazal, the rabbis, they understood this pasuk to basically be referring to 2 different methods of how you can kosher your utensils, from the taste of non-kosher in the vessels. So Chazal said following rule, which is kibolo kach polto, which means as the taste is absorbed, as the taste goes into the vessel, so too it will be removed. So utensils that were used with water, meaning a pot that was used to cook soup, are koshered with submersion in boiling water. That is called hagala, which we'll speak about in a second. And utensils which were used directly on the fire with dry heat, such as grills, like a barbecue, must be koshered with more intensive method of koshering, which is by placing the utensils directly in fire. That is called libun. Those are the 2 main ways you kosher. So what we'll do is just describe that when in our kitchen. So that's really the background. But in our kitchens, there's basically 4 different ways that we kosher our stuff, based off that Gemara. But yeah, but there are obviously lots more details. So the 4 different ways is based on what we just described. And number 1, it's called libun, the libun chomer, libun gomer, that a complete libun. So libun again is when you place something directly in fire. Utensils used directly in the fire, like for example, a barbecue grate, must be koshered by placing them into fire. Right? That makes sense. If it was used directly in fire, you have to kosher it by placing it directly into fire. This process has the effect of burning away any absorbed taste. To qualify as a complete libun, metal must be heated until it glows. So, an example would be a self-clean cycle of an oven also qualifies as libun. And when you do a libun, there's no need to wait 24 hours before a libun. So it is advised there's no need to scrub the utensil before performing libun since the fire will burn off the residue. But some cleaning is advised. So the examples of what types of things you need to do libun chomer on, this high level of kashering with intense heat, is stovetops or ovens or a warming jar or a barbecue grate. I think that's why they say that if you're going to use a barbecue, you need a blowtorch to do it, because you put stuff directly on the fire, so you need to kosher it with direct fire, so you use a blowtorch. But the most common, I think, thing that you kosher with that is your ovens. And most people, if you self clean, I think that usually works. Obviously you have to see how it works with your oven. But the second method, which we mentioned before, is what we call agala. The utensils that were used to cook non-kosher liquid, or chametz liquid, can be koshered with hagala, boiling in water. To prepare the utensil for hagala, the utensils need to be cleaned first. And only utensils that can be scrubbed clean should be koshered. Items that have narrow cracks, crevices, or scratches, or other areas that cannot be cleaned, should not really be kosher for Pesach. For example, pots with rolled lips, or bottles with narrow necks, or filters, basic colanders, knives. The food can get chopped with a blade and handle. This is from the OU website. This is how they write it. After cleaning, the utensil should then be left for 24 hours. To kosher, every part of the utensil must make contact with boiling water. So every part should touch the boiling water. Yeah. So, for example, they say a spoon can be immersed into a pot of boiling water for 10 seconds, turned over, and then the remainder is immersed. And then when you remove that utensil from boiling water, it should be rinsed off in cold water. And while strictly speaking, utensils may be koshered in a clean non-Pesach pot that is not used for 24 hours, the minhag, however, is to kosher the pot first by boiling water in the pot and then discarding. So so anything that was used with liquid, or hot liquid, should be koshered with this process called hagala, which means boiling in water, and that's silverware, pots, small items. This would be how you would kosher a microwave with a steam. And those who kosher their dishwashers would also be doing hagala on their dishwashers. I think the most famous way that, this is what I think about when I think about people koshering, is this third method, which we haven't mentioned yet, which is called iroi. Iroi means pouring. So if the utensil only came in contact with hot liquid being poured on it, which is what we call iroi means pouring, it can be koshered in the same manner. If the utensil came in contact with hot chametz solid, then one should kosher by pouring boiling hot water, accompanied by a heated stone. So say, for example, if hot pasta fell into a sink, stone should be heated on the stove and moved around the surface of the sink while boiling water is poured over them. In this way, the water will remain boiling on the surface of the sink. The stone may need to be reheated several times since they cool down quickly, and all other aspects of the process is identical to Hagala. But basically, the way Roey works is you pour hot water on whatever it is that you're trying to kosher. So this is how you would really kosher your sink, and your some not all countertops, but some countertops which you can kosher, or your sink faucet, etc. So that's by pouring hot water over it. I guess this is that's a third way that koshering is done. And then the fourth way, which is really like the first way, but a little bit different. It's called libun still, but it's a lesser degree of libun. That you can heat up dishes with fire. It's basically heating up dishes with fire and without water until it gets pretty hot, but it doesn't need to be as hot as a full libun. There are certain cases, certain things which it's enough to get it to libun kal, a lower degree of heating it up, which can be accomplished by heating something in an oven at 550 degrees Fahrenheit, they say, for 1 hour. And you can use this instead of doing Hagala. It also may be used when you require libun as only an extra stringency. There are certain cases where that happens. But basically, for our purposes, there are four different ways you kosher. There's libun, which is direct, intense fire. There's Hagala, which is boiling in water. There's Roey, which is pouring hot water over something, and there's libun kal, which is direct fire, but a lower degree temperature. Then just something to be aware of is that materials are not all the same, meaning ceramic, such as china and different types of coating on pots, might not be kosher. And then there's always a question, can you kosher glass as well? And then some poskim do not permit koshering plastic or other synthetic materials for Pesach. However, the opinion of the OU is that may be kosher if there is a need. Of course, you should ask your rabbi for guidance. That's what they write here. And then also the counters are sometimes an issue. Composite stone, they say can be koshered. And just as real materials such as metal, wood, stone, natural rubber, and fabric can be koshered. So I'll finish with this. I mean, there's just so many different specific questions that one could have in regard to their kitchen. But I'll finish with one question that I saw. That can one kosher their drinking glasses for Pesach? I had different options here. Can one kosher plastic bowls and utensils for Pesach? I'll give you the short answer. The OU says you can be lenient if there's a need. But we'll do can one kosher their drinking glasses for Pesach. So the Shulchan Aruch writes that glass does not absorb and therefore does not need to be koshered. However, the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch is for Sephardim. For the Ramah, which is Ashkenazim, writes that the minhag of Ashkenazim is that glass that has been used with hot chametz may not be used on Pesach, even if it was kosher. There are two reasons given for this. One reason is because we compare glass, which is made from sand, to cheres, like earthenware, which is made from clay. And just as cheres, earthenware, cannot be koshered, likewise glass, because it's made from sand, right, it also may not be koshered. So that's one reason, according to the Ramah. The other reason is because we're concerned that one might not kosher their glass appropriately because you might be afraid it's going to crack. And if you're afraid it's going to crack, you're not going to kosher well, so we don't let you kosher it. But the Chaye Adam writes that if it is difficult to purchase new drinking glasses for Pesach, glasses which are used primarily for cold drinks may be koshered with hagala to use to do the boiling in hot water. So it seems like from this that the drinking glasses may be okay to kosher in boiling water, but you should, of course, ask all the questions that come up to the people who can answer them for you. But this was, I think, just a good introduction to at least be aware of the certain issues that come up when you're koshering different things you need to kosher in your kitchen for Pesach. Does anyone have any questions? We're going to stop here.